Hello, my name is Lochlainn. I'm a researcher at Dublin City University, and you're very welcome to this presentation on purposefully different approaches to flexible learning at scale. I'm delivering this presentation on behalf of myself and my co-authors, and we're going to be looking at two master's programs that DCU implemented over the courses of the years 2019 and 2020, and to look at the lessons that they can provide for other institutions that are seeking to integrate and to expand innovative flexible learning programs at scale. The presentation has 5 primary portions. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about DCU itself, and then the strategic context, the actual drivers that led to the adoption of these masters, and these larger forces and larger trends that were at play. Going to talk then about the implementation process, the different stakeholders that were involved in the QA process itself, and the implications that can be drawn from it also. Then going to look at the lessons that we've learned over the length of this process, and what practices we've incorporated as a result of these experiences. And then it's going to be linked to the bigger picture and the wider questions that might be out there from a QA perspective, particularly as pertains to new forms of certified learning and micro-credentials, an area that the Dublin City University has become very active in. So first of all, to talk about the university itself, DCU is based on the north side in Dublin, and you can see our mission there is transforming lives and societies. It's a relatively young university, but there's a long trend of innovative and innovation coming from the university over the length of its 40-year period. We have our National Institute for Digital Learning here, which is based on campus. It's where I work and where my colleagues work as well. And we're also involved in many different projects with European and international partners as relates to both QA and many other issues as well. So an example of how DCU has been a bit of a trendsetter is DCU Connected, which is a suite of online degrees which have been delivered for a long time now from the university, and there's over 800 students at present undertaking both undergraduate and master's level qualifications at a distance. So DCU has significant experience in this area and a long tradition in doing so. Now, in addition to that, I'll speak in a moment about our strategic relationship with FutureLearn, a MOOC platform, massive open online course, but we've also offered many different courses on FutureLearn, and FutureLearn has become part of the university's strategic mission as well. Something that I was very lucky to get to be involved with was our series of Irish language online courses, Irish 101, and many others, funded by the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht here in Ireland, as well as the 20-year strategy for the Irish language. So these are great courses that have had over 80,000 registered learners on them. And we're also part of the university's strategy of expanding access to different types of learning content that many learners around the world might be interested in, but may not have had experience in learning with. Another example of an innovative project we've been involved in is the DigiCulture project. This is a really fantastic Erasmus Plus project which is designed to improve the digital competences and social inclusion of adults in creative industries. So there is recognition of skills gaps that are very prevalent in the cultural industries and cultural sector, and DigiCulture is a really exciting project that looks at what sorts of skills shortages might be present within the sector and what specifically could be done to alleviate these skills shortages as well. So then to talk about the strategic context to these master's programs, what they were and why they were adopted, the first thing we'd mention would be to return to that strategic partnership with FutureLearn. So DCU has been very interested in looking at alternative ways to not just certify learning, but also to learn much more about the global educational partnerships that are so integral to universities in the 21st century also. So in 2019, the university launched a strategic partnership with FutureLearn, which has been very successful and which has seen the university incorporate, as we'll discuss, some aspects of the QA process from FutureLearn, in addition to actually feeding into FutureLearn's QA process as well, in an almost dialectical manner. Another development that the university has really looked at with interest is the common micro-credential framework, which was developed by FutureLearn in conjunction with several European partners. and partner organisations. Why this was interesting was because DCU has always placed a very firm emphasis on the need for anything that is conducted to be standardised and to be potentially credit yielding. Not every course has to yield credit and has to integrate with our existing systems, but where possible, it's important that they do so. And also, we were of the opinion that it's very important that any offerings we have could potentially stack into a certified form of learning and a commonly understood common currency as well. So to bring it to the immediate future, or the immediate past, just before these courses were developed, DCU entered a partnership with SkillNet Ireland, which is a training group, to deliver 2 master's programs, and they were on specific topics. So we had one on the artificial intelligence sphere and another on the Internet of Things. And so, for example, we can see here that the then Irish Education Minister, Mairéad O'Connor, laid the stage quite clearly about a new reality for Irish business. So that we were talking about large numbers of workers who might be in jobs, professional jobs, technological jobs, for example, and who might need upskilling or to learn more about their field, to find new knowledge, and also to recognise learning that they might be doing within their day job in any case as well. So we saw that there was a real market, and not just a market, but also a constituency of people for whom there were possibilities for implementing new forms of qualifications, and who might not have been particularly well catered for up until this point. So within this wider consideration, we also look then at the strategic implementation, how exactly these programs were implemented, and what elements came across within that development process and development cycle, what parts of this process proved challenging and what parts might have lessons for others as well. So this is simply the marketing materials for one of the MSCs. You can see it's an MSc in computing for artificial intelligence, and this is just used as an example to show you the indicative content and the indicative structure of the courses. You can see here that it was a 2-year part-time master's, and that we explicitly aimed it at those who are employed in Republic of Ireland registered companies. This is taken from the SkillNet website. One thing you'll notice in looking at it is that the structure of the Masters contains quite a few diverse different topics. So we have obviously elements of machine learning, data management and visualization, practical skills that would be important. But we're also looking at research methods and professional skills. So it was very much tethered to workplace learning and to understand how exactly young professionals, or those who are not so young, can develop their career while also learning at the same time. And this was a really important element of the process and of defining how this program might be particularly useful for those who were in the workplace and who are developing those types of skills that were mentioned on the last couple of slides. So when it came to the actual principles that underpinned the development, the first, particularly relevant from a QA perspective, was to actually link it to existing university offerings and quality standards. Critically, that anything that was put out had to be of a sufficient standard relative to our existing both governing principles, but as well as that to the standards that we would maintain for ourselves also, but while also enabling new methods of educational participation and expanding that pool of people who might be able to take these types of courses. An important contextual point is that implementation required a lot of cooperation amongst many different types of stakeholders. So we had academics, we also had learning design units here in DCU, strategic management and administrative staff, and notably these are all only internal staff. In addition to that, of course, we had external bodies, FutureLearn itself. I'll discuss the development cycle in a moment, but you're talking about multiple different types of stakeholders with different perspectives. Now, the overarching or perhaps underlying principle as well was that this as an exercise was a useful opportunity to develop the courses, of course, and to meet that specific goal of a partnership with SkillNet, but also to learn more broadly from the development process. I think that's an important point also, that the process itself was seen as something that we could use to look at what we were doing as an institution and to see whether lessons we could take from this outside, external oriented process of developing new courses on a third-party platform. Could we take some of those lessons from the process home as well to our core deliverings as well? So then when it comes to the learning design fundamentals that were underpinning this process, there was obviously a focus on academic excellence that has to underpin everything that we do as universities. There was also an emphasis on online delivery and that students would have some access to lectures with both synchronous and asynchronous elements integrated within each course, and that students would have that support in addition to having high quality learning materials. There was also an emphasis on a flexible learning design approach so that it would be oriented towards professionals and people who were, of course, likely to be very busy. A related point is that these would be applied and career oriented, so we would have those skills, developing specific tangible skills for these professionals, and that they'd be delivered through the FutureLearn platform. So this is simply a graph that explains our different QA process and in particular the collaborative approach. And you'll see that we've highlighted three main groupings and a kind of cyclical process, which I'll talk through very briefly. The first was that academic staff played a core role in this, in terms of having course materials, pedagogical approaches, and assessment practices as well, in addition to a lot of institutional knowledge as to, obviously, the subject itself. Now, they worked in close conjunction with learning design units, for example, the Ideas Lab here in DCU, and the learning designers were focused on, obviously, scaffolding activities and design-based elements, so that was very important, how exactly it should look on the platform, in addition to having technical recommendations. And you'll notice that I've used arrows here to demonstrate how the two are linked together. So for example, academic staff having significant experience designing their own courses, including on our online platform Loop, were able to feed into the design process. And of course, the learning designers dealing with different courses had quite a bit of institutional knowledge about what exactly, for example, assessment might look like, how to do it in a best manner possible. So we had this very interesting internal cyclical process. In addition to that, we had our external process, so on the platform itself, which included a lot of standardization and validation concerns, so for example, minimum criteria and accessibility also. So this external form of QA was also very critical and fed back into the learning design too, and as we discussed there momentarily, you learn a lot of lessons through these processes. So when we were implementing, there were quite a few core questions. I mean, the first was how best to redesign courses for a new format, how to implement assessment practices, very important. How specifically should courses align with existing offerings and processes, and then of course as well how to ensure quality, however we were going to define it. So these questions were critical in implementation, and there were actually several solutions that we looked at across a range of perspectives that might prove useful for other people and other institutions implementing similar processes. The first was, of course, having that collaborative developmental process that I've mentioned, which was encompassing both academic and learning designer input. This was very important. But in addition to that, this was very much a holistic process, as there was an agreed institutional approach for offerings based on ECTS, and thus aligning it with the European Qualifications Framework and the National Qualifications Framework, or National Framework for Qualifications, which is very important. And this meant that there was a common terminology which could be utilised by the university when we were looking at these programmes. And having that institutional approach, that strategic approach, is really quite critical. In addition to that, there were internal quality assurance and approval processes agreed, which was another important element also, that QA was very much embedded within DCU's internal processes. Now, when it came to actual assessment, there was varying different types of assessments utilised. On the one hand, there was a large number of in-platform forms of assessment utilised, typically quizzes, and they were utilised more for formative assessment. But when it came to actual summative forms of assessment, there was university validated and administered through, for example, the Loop page, which is the learning management system, to ensure that this was controlled within DCU's existing processes and existing frameworks also. Now, relatedly, there was a hybrid model which actually allowed for some LMS integration with the FutureLearn platform. Students typically logged in through the LMS, which itself created a more seamless experience for students as they were doing so, and certainly allowed us to integrate the FutureLearn element within our wider offerings also. And in addition to that, probably an important conceptual point was the iterative design process that was implemented, and there were cyclical changes based on student feedback, based on what precisely students wanted, but also their opinions of the course, with the understanding that this was at least partially exploratory, and the student voice was very much emphasised also, in terms of understanding that we have many answers, but we don't necessarily have every single one. So this brings me to the lessons that are learned by DCU from this process, and also what can therefore be kind of said might prove useful for other institutions in a similar position and with similar contextual framework. The first thing we'd say is, and I think appropriately for this forum, that all value is anchored in quality, but what exactly quality is something that might be more open to debate and contestation. A big thing that this process has highlighted for the university is the need for diverse stakeholder participation, and especially buy-in, that this is very critical, that when you have a complex project with many moving parts, that there needs to be differing forms of university implementation, but also in addition to that, there needs to be different forms of cooperation across often rather diverse teams of workers with different perspectives and different ways of looking at a problem. And in addition to this need for diverse stakeholder participation, there are also a huge number of inherent challenges in scaling and developing those new online offerings. As we've mentioned, some of the internal, making sure that systems are actually interoperating, and also external when we're dealing with a range of third-party people or third-party perspectives, also ensuring that there is a certain degree of synchronicity there is also critical, and that's been something that we've found in our own experience, that these are challenging projects. Now, in addition to this, there are many other ways to measure or to even define quality, and we present this not as an all-encompassing example. I'm sure there are many other types we could include, but there's 5 categories that we could see here. For example, student, academic quality, societal benefit, institutional value, and diversification. And to take each one in turn, for example, student-centered measures of quality, we could talk about satisfaction, relevance, and value. And this can often be reflected with making sure that user experiences are good and that there's an iterative redesign based upon student feedback. The institutional value is also critical, so stakeholder engagement and investment is itself something that these types of projects can promote when you actually have those broader projects that cause different parts of the university to work in strategic concord. And in particular to actually forward a common institutional strategy as well. Academic quality is unquestionably the one that I think has the most emphasis, and rightly so, ensuring that there are specific QA standards which are met, both internal and external, and in addition to that, making sure that any offerings are academically informed and validated also. Diversification is perhaps a more abstract idea, but this concept of unbundling and promoting different learning pathways for different learners and diverse learners, as well as including strategic partnerships with industry and societal partners as well, different social groups, that this is actually quite critical, and it links closely to institutional value. And then we have societal benefit in actually allowing people to learn for new purposes, expanding participation to new groups, and allowing those that are actually in the workplace at present to learn these new skills and to further themselves also, and to further their skills development. So to reflect on these, we would know that win-win is definitely possible, and it's actually a prerequisite really to implement any form of change. And the quality assurance within these changing structures and curricula, it's very challenging and it is complex, but it's also critical to do so. And as we've just noted, there are really diverse ways of viewing quality assurance, and that a wider lens is necessary than just compliance. There also needs to be consideration of the strategic and organisational purposes that QA can be put to, which actually links closely to the need to work with valued third parties, which can bring those new perspectives that are useful not only organisationally or not only operationally, but also organisationally, and to lead for transformative change as well. So then, to focus lastly on the bigger picture, and in particular how this particular project might be linked to other developments we might see within different spheres of the university and of the university strategy. Accounting for a wider context is very actually important, and extremely relevant, of course, as well. So the first one is that we're in a rapidly changing landscape, which requires a lot of evolution from higher education bodies and from institutions also. Now, COVID-19 is an example, and it's reflected in this year's themes, that has highlighted some tensions regarding online delivery, and that there is a strategic need for conceptualising QA in a diverse way, as we have spoken, that we talk about the voices of trade unions, for example, employers, social groups, societal groups. All these groups are coming in now as part of, say, a wider discourse, now that we've seen that online learning has become very much a scaled phenomenon and has become a more central issue within education over the last year. It's critical that these voices are heard as well, and that when we're talking about equality, we talk about these groups too. Now, there are much wider debates as well regarding various ways to term these: lifelong learning, non-formal learning, and reskilling. And it's important to note that they're really not mutually exclusive, and this has been something that our institutional strategy has attempted to reflect. This is a design that was put together by Professor Mark Brown and Dr. Mairéad on conceptualising a credential ecology. And you can see here that there are two distinct axes here about whether a course, as conceptualised, could be credit-bearing or non-credit-bearing on the one hand, but then it could also be bundled or unbundled. So on the one hand, in the upper left-hand corner, we have macro credentials, formal accredited degrees, which would be what we would traditionally imagine when we're thinking about a university qualification. But then in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see short courses, those that are non-credit bearing, but they're bundled, they come together, and they're non-stackable, so you can have a short course. You'll then see in the upper corner micro-credentials, which is an interesting space to be in, those that are credit-bearing and unbundled. So they're stackable, they're accredited, they link to QA processes within universities, and they can be either formal or semi-formal, but the critical element is that they do yield credit. And then we can see that in the bottom right-hand corner, there's badges and awards. So those informal and non-formal or non-accredited digital badges. These are often utilised at conferences. I know I've earned many. I'm sure many of you have as well. But this kind of ecology and ecological framework might be interesting when we're talking about different types of qualifications for different purposes, and not merely qualifications, but when we're talking about different types of courses. Now, what this means is that each of these categories would themselves have different quality assurance implications, would be the way that we would look at this. And an example of how DCU has evolved into this space is our own micro-credential that's now offered through FutureLearn on FinTech, financial innovation. So this is designed for professionals within the financial sector, really exciting qualification, and has seen massive interest as well. But this is an example of how we might be able to tether our existing QA processes and our existing qualification frameworks into new types of qualifications that can be quite innovative, and that can also fulfill specific gaps within not necessarily an educational market, but perhaps an educational sector or sphere or particular industry also, that these all have great value and potential. And then an example perhaps of a shorter course that we offer is a new course, a Digital Edge, which is available on FutureLearn, which was designed to help students as they pivot towards the new normal. As we can see, they're thriving at university in the new normal. This course was incredibly successful, had thousands of registrations, and it would fall, of course, into the short course category, but could perhaps in the future be incorporated into a specific type of micro-credential. So this shows the potential for different courses to flit between different categories, and of course that's the point of such a typology, that things don't often neatly fit into different boxes. But in addition to this, that we're looking at exploring many different ways of bringing new solutions to online learning, and not only to online learning, but to online learning for different purposes. And this is really our key point. So looking to the future, understanding what's effective requires really understanding the context and the people who are involved. Now, the lessons of this case study are that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to QA, and in particular when we discuss micro-credentials, there is a real tension that's visible between personalisation on the one hand and standardisation on the other. So we want our frameworks to be common, we want our frameworks to be currency that's common and well understood across different national borders, but at the same time most countries and perhaps even most universities want a degree of personalisation also. And we'd also link back to that point about including those broader voices, trade unions, societal stakeholders, is important for broadening research to understand it better, but also for broadening QA as well. I'd also just note lastly, our own interest in this space in the National Institute for Digital Learning is driven by, you can see here, our micro-credential observatory, which has an array of research, policy initiatives and presentations that we've given. So the university is extremely committed to this space. We're very interested in it, and to think that this is going to be an area of massive growth, not merely in some monetary sense, but also in terms of interest and a need for academic vigour within this space. So lastly, the guiding questions that come out of this case study. These are ones that we might talk about a little bit more in the live presentation in early November. But how can QA processes inform changing academic environments and this increasing emphasis on flexible learning? What are the tensions? This is an important one, and the opportunities that are in these processes, in addition to those stakeholders that should be engaged. This is very important. And of course, whose conception of quality matters. So there are many more questions, and we don't have all the answers, but we hope to see you at the forum in the middle of November. So I will say thank you very much, or in Irish, Gur Maithagh. Thank you for watching.